Welcome to Stuff They Didn't Teach Me in Sunday School. I live in West St. Louis County, extreme West St. Louis County. But within 15 minutes of my house, there are 4 Lutheran congregations that I could go to. Within 15 minutes of my house, I have a choice of 4 different worship sites to go to that all fit within the denomination that I'm a part of. Multiple worship sites isn't an issue for us today. And there will maybe those that would disagree with this theme that I see in the book of Deuteronomy, but to me it's fairly clear. Another theme that comes up in Deuteronomy is that God expects, anticipates, and commands one worship site for this nation, not multiple sites. I suspect that it probably would, in God's mind, he's thinking it would be harder to control and focus the worship if people could worship all over the nation. So there are many lines in the book of Deuteronomy that focus that on one site. I'm going to take you to Deuteronomy chapter 12 and kind of skip you around a little bit. Chapter 12, verse 11. Starts in the middle of a sentence. But then to the place which Yahweh your God will choose to make his name dwell there, there you shall bring all that I command you. If the place which Yahweh your God will choose to put his name there is too far from you, then you may kill any of your herd or your flock which Yahweh has given you, as I have commanded you, and you may eat within your towns as much as you desire. That phrase will come up again and again in the book of Deuteronomy. The place where God causes his name to dwell. There's a couple of factors about that. If I were to ask you, what is that place in the Old Testament where God chose to put his worship site? I'm going to guess that most of you are going to pick Jerusalem. Ironically, that's not the place that God chose. The place that God originally put his worship site was Shiloh. It was David that decided it should go to Jerusalem. God blesses that decision, but there still is the one worship site, even when David decides to move that worship site to Jerusalem. One site. The other factor that's here is this idea that it's God's name that dwells there, not God that dwells there. That would become a point of confusion later on through history, as Israel more and more operated as if they had God himself contained in that Jerusalem temple. In fact, the rabbis of Jesus' time and shortly before Jesus' time taught that certainly God inhabited all things, but he really liked to hang around Jerusalem. And when he was hanging around Jerusalem, where he really found his joy in being was in the Jerusalem temple. And of course, in the Jerusalem temple, if you wanted to really encounter God, you encountered him in the Holy of Holies. That was his favorite place. In their minds, that's where God touched earth. Deuteronomy makes the point that it's not God that dwells there, it's his name that dwells there. And this place is to represent Yahweh to a world that doesn't know him. The place is not just a place for Israel to turn inward on herself and worship in her own way and never get outside herself. It's a place that represents Yahweh to a world that doesn't know Yahweh. That may say some things about our churches today. We're not still under that same compulsion to have only one worship site, of course. We live in a New Testament era where many of those commandments have dropped off. But there still is this issue of what does that worship site represent? Is it a place for Christians to get away from the world? Or is it a place where Yahweh makes his name dwell, where Jesus Christ makes his name dwell, so that the world can see Jesus? Something to think about in your own congregation.